Here's what every Democrat has voted for in D.C. They've all voted to have abortion up until the moment of birth. Now, if you want to follow how that happens, you crush a baby's skull. A baby that would be born healthy, alive at 9 months, 2 minutes before, okay, it can be crushed and killed. Okay, I think that's extreme and barbaric. On top of that, all the Democrats have voted to say that a baby born healthy, alive can be allowed to put in the corner and starve itself to death.
I'm joined now by Democrat Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, who's running against the guy who you all just saw, Rick Scott, for the U.S. Senate in Florida. First of all, can you speak on the staggering dishonesty of what Rick Scott just said and what he's trying to accomplish by saying it?
Look, Brian, this was a moment that was extremely disturbing. He has been spreading disinformation and some of it actually Russian propaganda for a long time. This is a man who voted to not certify the elections and after the results of 2020. And now you're watching something that we have been seeing for a long time from Rick Scott. And it's that he has absolutely no problem lying to Floridians. But these lies are so extremely disturbing. The way that he actually talks about women that for many of them have to really work to be able to have a pregnancy. But many women are now faced with the threat that if they have a pregnancy that's not developing, that it's facing a threat to their own lives, they are not able to have an abortion here in the state of Florida or terminate that pregnancy. We are living under one of the most extreme bans on abortion, a 6-week ban. Rick Scott fully supports a 6-week ban, but he's lying to these young students. This was at the University of Miami. It was during a class, a political science class that he was speaking. And I was in that classroom because I was going to speak after he spoke. And the young women in that classroom were gasping and they felt so uncomfortable. It was so disturbing. And after I spoke, so many of them came to me and they said, thank you so much for speaking the truth, for standing up to those lies. This is such a private matter for a woman, and it's part of our healthcare. It's central to our integrity. It's part of our civil rights and freedoms here in the state of Florida. And as a mom, Brian, I just was so outraged that this man was talking to young women in the way that you're all watching right now. He cannot get reelected. He wants to be Senate Majority Leader. He wants to push a national abortion ban and also ban access to IVF and contraception. He voted against those two bills just recently in the past few weeks. If he gets reelected, he's extremely dangerous. And even if Kamala Harris wins the White House, she wins the presidency, if Rick Scott and the Republicans hold the Senate, she's not going to be able to really work towards all the progress that we've already been making in this country under this administration. So I need everybody to support me in this race. DebbieForFlorida.com. Rick Scott is a self-funder. He put $64 million of his own money to barely win in 2018, only with 10,000 votes. We can win, Brian. We can win. I need people to pay attention to what's going on in Florida.
When Rick Scott comes in front of a classroom full of people, is he breaking through to any of the folks in that classroom? I know you mentioned that a bunch of young women had come up to you afterwards and thanked you, but more broadly, are these lies actually breaking through to any semblance, any fraction of the population that he's speaking to? Were there any people in that classroom who bought into what he was saying?
I mean, that classroom had over 200 students, and I can tell you that the majority of students, young men also, were just gasping, listening to him speak. I don't think that those lies broke through. If anything, it turned a lot of people off. Right. After I spoke, there were lines and lines of students wanting to talk to me, take pictures with me. So it was very evident that he turned that classroom off, and he's been turning women and men across the state off. I mean, the guy oversaw the largest Medicare fraud. He was CEO of that company that committed Medicare fraud. He wants to take away Social Security and Medicare. He wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act. He was a disastrous governor in protecting our environment. People here know him, and that's why he really just can't break through. He can't break that threshold.
Isn't there something also to be said about the contempt that he and Republicans have for their own supporters, that they could spread such an egregious lie and expect their supporters to be such fools that they would believe them?
Yeah, and it's really sad that they try to take advantage of that voice, that power that they have right now sitting in elected office, right? That they have that microphone and they target very vulnerable communities, instilling fear. They use fear mongering to get political points. For very religious, very conservative voters, it'll be the fear that they're instilling in that somehow doctors or women are killing babies. And let's be real here, Brian. We live in the United States of America. It is against the law to hurt a baby purposely. I mean, what he's talking about is a crime. Right. And there are laws in the books to prosecute anyone that's hurting a baby purposely. Yeah. And it doesn't happen. It's false. What he's talking about is just to instill that fear. And it's really shameful. That man belongs nowhere close to political office. And for me as a mom, again, I'm going to tell you, it was borderline, even abusive, because it was so disturbing the way that he was speaking to these young women.
Yeah, I mean, my mom has been a labor and delivery nurse for 35 years. The notion that anything that Rick Scott is saying is even in the universe of reality is an absolute joke. I do want to switch our attention to some big news out of Florida. The Emerson poll just released on Friday shows Rick Scott at 46% and you at 45%, with 9% of respondents undecided. That would suggest then, to your earlier point, that Florida is actually in play. So what do you say to folks who've written off Florida?
Well, they're not paying attention is what I say to them. And look, that poll is just one of many polls that have shown that I'm basically tied with Rick Scott at this point. And here's what I want people to understand. We haven't even been on TV yet. We're just starting our communications plan. We've been very strategic. We've been using the limited funds that we have to communicate with voters. We have been building a grassroots movement, and people in Florida are rejecting the extreme policies that have been coming out from Washington, D.C. by Rick Scott, by people like Rick Scott, but mostly from Tallahassee, right? I mean, people here are tired of the attacks against education, banning books, taking away the freedom for people to be able to make a good living in the state of Florida. We have an affordability crisis here. People can't pay their mortgage, their rent, their insurance rates. They can't afford to send their children to school or pay for students that go into our public universities. It's becoming so unaffordable. And now they're taking away a woman's right to choose. And so Floridians have been organizing. We have been building a grassroots campaign, and it showed in the primary, the solid primary win that we had just a couple of weeks ago. And now you're seeing a poll where people now, when they know that they have a choice, they come to us very quickly. They don't want to vote for Rick Scott. They're done with his policies. And that's why people need to pay attention, because we can win the seat and we need to keep the Senate majority.
Well, I usually save the donation request for the end, but I do think it's important right now for folks who are watching this. There is a reason that we benefit from donating early in these election cycles, and that is because Republicans, as we know, will use every avenue they can to redefine someone like Debbie Mucarsel-Powell here before she can define herself. And of course, it takes money to define herself, because she needs to be able to get on the airwaves and reach all of the people in Florida, which is the third biggest state in the country. And so that costs a lot of money. But to be able to reach all of those people now, before Republicans have the opportunity to get on the air and lie about her to people who don't know any better, that's why it's so important to donate early and often. So if you have the ability to contribute, where can folks who are watching donate to your campaign?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. It's debbieforflorida.com is our website. It's very easy. It's very fast. And, it's incredible because I have seen money flowing all over the country. And for us, we are a huge state. And you're right, it's expensive to communicate. But just imagine, we have over 20 million people that live in the state of Florida. We have different media markets in the north, central, and southern parts of the state. But we have a really great strategy that once we communicate with our voters, you saw in that poll, there's a portion of independent voters. And what we've seen is that when we talk to them, they come to us. We need to win Florida. It's the top pickup opportunity that we now have to keep the Senate majority. And so please, debbieforflorida.com. We can do it. I've been fighting for over a year. We have 60 days left. join my campaign.
To that point, there was also a poll out this week out of Montana. I believe it was an AARP poll showing that the Republican challenger to Jon Tester, and that's Tim Sheehy, is actually leading him by 6 points. If that happens, Democrats would effectively lose the normal path to retaining their Senate majority. So can you speak on the added significance of your race then in light of that new poll out of Montana?
Yeah, and look, I know Jon Tester, and he's a fighter, and I think that, no matter what, I am really hoping that he pulls this one through, because we need him in the Senate, obviously. But the reality is that if we lose Montana and Republicans hold the majority in the Senate, this is what it's going to mean for America. Rick Scott, if he gets reelected and he becomes Senate Majority Leader, now remember, this is a man who's very much aligned with Trump. He wrote a plan that was a preamble to Project 2025. He's extremely close to the Heritage Foundation, which wrote Project 2025. They will undo all the things that this administration has done. What does that mean? The cap of insulin at $35, gone. The Affordable Care Act, they will try to repeal it. They will continue to cut taxes for the top 0.1%, and they will raise taxes for middle-class families. This is part of Rick Scott's plan. He wants to sunset, eliminate Social Security, Medicare, and they will pass a national abortion ban without any access to IVF or contraception. I was in Congress, Brian, when they were signing this life of conception bill, the extreme Republicans in the House of Representatives. They have a strategy. They have a plan. It's a 900-page written plan. I am not telling you anything you haven't heard before. If you have any doubts, read Rick Scott's plan. They want to dismantle the Department of Education. And at the end of the day, the race to the White House is very, very close. And the Senate is going to be key in holding the line. Because just imagine for a moment, if Kamala Harris, which I think she's going to be our first woman president, the energy there is unstoppable. But if Trump gets reelected to go back into the White House, and we don't have the Senate, there will be no line. We will lose democracy. We will lose every single freedom that we have enjoyed for over 200 years.
And I would add, too, that we also have a Supreme Court justice in Sotomayor who is in her mid-70s. And so if you think the Supreme Court is bad now, if it's entrenched with Republican rule now, just imagine if it goes from 6-3 to 7-2. Let's finish off with this. Florida is one of the states that Democrats largely seem to have abandoned because it's actually gotten redder in every election cycle since 2000. So what's making your race so close? What is the principal issue or issues that are resonating so much with Floridians that hadn't before?
Look, our campaign is about building a better future for families here in Florida that have been struggling under Republican rule for over 20 years. And I talk about the issues. And when I talk about the issue, everyone relates to the challenges that I have faced growing up, starting at a minimum wage job. I've worked very hard through high school and college just to make ends meet. My mother brought me here from Ecuador when I was 14. And because of those opportunities, I can now speak to you as the official U.S. Senate nominee to run here in the state of Florida as a Democrat. It's the first time there's ever been a Latina at the top of the ticket. I've been very present around the state with Latino communities, talking to them about the issues that matter most. And Republicans, Independents, Democrats are all coming and joining this campaign because they can see a vision of a Florida with someone that's going to be fighting for them, that's going to be lifting them up, that's going to fight to reduce gun violence and protect our children, which we continue to see are dying because of this gun violence epidemic. This is about issues. We are putting partisan politics aside. I am very clear what it means if Rick Scott gets reelected, and I'm very clear about what I'm going to do when I get to the Senate. And so I really do feel very optimistic, energized, and I'm really grateful for the amount of work that so many Floridians are putting in to get me to where we are right now. We have 60 days. I'm a point behind. I need support. We can do this. And believe me when I tell you, Florida is an incredibly important state this election cycle, but in future election cycles.
This may very well be the difference between a Senate Majority Leader, Schumer or Rick Scott, to your point.
Exactly. So, and also the values of Floridians have always been right in the middle, Brian. I mean, we talk about swing states. Yes, this is a swing state. And over the past two election cycles, it's swung to the right. It's swinging right back to us. Obama won this state in 2008 and 2012. Democrat won statewide in 2018. And what did Republicans do? They invested even more. They dug in. They doubled down. Democrats need to do the same thing. We need to be strategic, just like Republicans are. They didn't pack and leave Florida because they lost a few election cycles. They actually invested more. That's what we need to do. This is an important state. If you care about the environment, if you care about Latinos, if you care about Black communities, if you care about maternal mortality rates and protecting a woman's right to choose, this is a state that you need to invest in, and this is a state that you need to support.
Well, that was perfectly put. Again, for those watching right now, please let's make sure we can get this state over the finish line. This would be a huge pickup opportunity. Again, that's DebbieForFlorida.com. Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, thank you so much for taking the time, and best of luck in the campaign trail.
Thank you, Brian.